Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. My name is Lee Kennedy Schaefer, and I'm a graduate student in biostatistics at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I'm also a research assistant there and have been a teaching assistant at the School of Public Health and at the college in the past. And I'm a member of the bargaining committee of the Harvard Graduate Students Union, and we're very happy to see all of you here today and hope everyone is doing well. We have a lot of really important things to talk about today, and so we're glad you could join us. I'll be facilitating this call, and so I just want to go over a few guidelines first and run through the agenda, and then we'll get started. Since this is a press conference, we are recording this for future use, and comments will be on the record and will be recorded, so just be aware of that as you're participating. Our technician will be muting all participants, so if you have a question when we get to that point, just use the raise hand feature, which is in the participants tab, which should be on the right side of your screen, and we'll add you to our running stack of who's in line to ask questions. You can also send in questions through the chat, and we'll take a look at those and read those out as well. We are going to do our best to answer as many of them as possible, but try to finish by 1 o'clock. If you use the raise hand, we'll call on you to ask your question, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Please try to be in a quiet area as much as possible before you unmute so we don't get too much background noise. And when you're done asking your question, if you would please mute yourself, and I'll direct it to one of our panelists, and they will then be able to answer. So we will go through, we have 6 panelists who will speak briefly about their own experiences, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience and comments. And we also have some questions that have been sent in advance. So I will read those out as well, interspersed with the live questions. And if I could also just ask folks to turn off their video if they're not on the panel while they're not speaking, just so that it's easier for people to find the video of the panelists who are speaking. So thanks again for being here. And we are going to, oh, and if you have any technical issues, you can chat it directly to the technician who's the host of the call, and hopefully you'll be able to sort it out through that. Yeah, so I want to start by turning it over to my fellow bargaining committee member, Justin Bloch.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Justin Bloch. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in the economics department, and I have been on the bargaining committee for the last 2 years. I'm also a teaching fellow in an intermediate macro class and have worked as a research assistant as well. So Friday, May 1st marks 2 years since our union was certified, and Provost Garber announced the administration's intention to bargain with us. However, after 2 years of slow walking and dragging their feet, the administration has still not put in the time to finalize a contract with student workers. In recent months, the university has slowed negotiations, offering to meet less than once per month, and often coming unprepared to discuss issues in detail. It's clear that student workers want a contract and want a contract now. And this has been clear through the petitions, through rallies, and we went on strike for the entire duration of December. But clearly the university has decided to hide behind the Trump NLRB and a pending decision that potentially threatens the protections of student workers to organize at private universities. So they further slow walk negotiations, they've engaged in regressive bargaining, and they continue to delay finalizing a contract. So the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has shown just how important the stability and the security of a contract really is. as the pandemic has not only disrupted students' academic lives, but also intensified the burden on student workers. Teaching fellows have had to put in extra hours to transition to online learning, and many people are happy to do that to make the teaching mission work smoothly. And research assistants in relevant fields have been putting off their current research in order to engage in COVID-related research. However, in some of these cases, the workload has gone too far. And the way that the university can address this is by signing a contract with the workload provision that we've agreed on, so that these during this transition time, these workloads do not become excessive. The university has also not taken the opportunity to address issues relevant to the COVID crisis or student worker health in the contract. For example, the university still continues to insist that master's students who teach in the public health school get paid substantially less than everybody else who teaches for the exact same work. The university still has also not agreed to paid leave for illness, for family leave, for bereavement. And even though the economic situation has changed, nothing is stopping the university from agreeing to real protections for discrimination and harassment for student workers. Lastly, given all the economic certainty, this is a really terrible time for many students graduating who will be going on to the academic job market. And many other students are very uncertain about having income at all to pay rent and to buy food. While the research is on hold and much of the funding attached to that research is in question. The university has not done enough to ensure that student workers have some degree of financial security during this time. And there's a risk of students having to leave early, or research, which has taken years of investment to build into, could just be lost. So the university needs to spend time and take the time to finalize this contract with student workers, ensure financial stability for people who have been admitted already. And certainly the university would benefit from avoiding any other possible further disruption. And the best way to do that is to make sure that they sign a contract now.
Thank you, Justin. Up next, we have Nishant, who is a student worker at the public health school, who will talk about some of his research regarding COVID.
Everybody, thanks for setting up this panel and this forum. My name is Nishant Kishore. I'm a third-year PhD student working at Harvard THTAN School of Public Health. And as you might imagine, we're working around the clock in a whole slew of COVID-related topics. This past month, 2 months, has seemed like years, which is interesting. And we're definitely continuing that same sort of effort that we started off with. A lot of my research is focused around using larger data sets, specifically from social media providers, ad tech, from cell phone companies, to get a better understanding of how our mobility is changing under these heterogeneous public policies in terms of social distancing, and how that affects the transmission dynamics of the disease itself over space and over time. So as you might imagine, this is something that changes on a daily basis, and a large chunk of our work, or at least the work that I've been doing, is actually working with local departments of public health, helping them get a better grasp of what these data can show and what they are showing and what they're not showing, and getting a better understanding of how well their interventions are working. You know, this scales all the way from the level of small cities to entire states that we're supporting. And you can read a little bit more about what we've been doing at covid19mobility.org. As you might imagine, our research is critical to our success in understanding, planning, treating for the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're dedicating all our energy in helping us sort of get through this and get past this. Grad student labor has always been and will continue to be central to the production and dissemination of knowledge that will help us collectively deal with this crisis. And grad student workers need protections that would come with the fair contract to sustain our ability contribute to ongoing efforts to better understand and combat the spread of COVID-19. I think it's especially important during these uncertain times to signal to the university how important our labor actually is. I think that there's a standard practice or expectation that these are emergency times, so it should be fine putting in extraordinary amounts of effort, and I do agree with that, but I think this amount of extraordinary effort highlights the importance that grad students play, or the important role that grad students play in the production of this research and the production of this knowledge. Some interesting things, right? So we can talk about health insurance, for example. The university keeps or continues to insist that the health plan is reasonable, despite the massive gaps for those who might need mental health care or specialist health visits, both topics that are especially important in these times of social isolation, in these times when people can't necessarily get out and get the necessary care that they need. And as researchers at HGSPH show the importance of comprehensive and affordable healthcare, the university itself is not providing adequate care and insurance for dependents that is unaffordable. In these sort of pressing times, they've had to waive visit limits that are sort of baked into how health insurance is given out to students because of the pandemic. But it doesn't really make sense that the university is insisting that these flawed policies would go back into place once the immediate crisis is over. Another thing I'd like to highlight that we spoke about a little bit is sort of the pay disparity. So again, at HSPH, all the TAs are generally paid about 63% of what TAs in GSAS, or the Graduate Schools of Arts and Sciences, would be paid for what is substantially the same type of work. And what the university is trying to do is codify this disparity into the contract in the midst of the pandemic. This exposes the need for well-educated public health leaders and doesn't really make sense as to why there should be a contractual reason that one group gets paid less than another. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nishant. So up next, we have 3 student workers in various fields at the university who will talk a little bit about how this crisis has affected their research and their work on campus. So I'd like to start with Maya.
Hi, my name is Maya Dietrich. I'm a 5th-year PhD student in applied physics, and I'm currently a research assistant, and I've also been a teaching fellow. And so to start with, a number of groups in physics and the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences have turned their focus to COVID-19 related work. And so these groups are applying their expertise in new ways to try to address the current crisis. And so these efforts include sort of new experimental research, providing assistance to healthcare workers, and just in general working on education and outreach. And so we're really proud of people that are stepping up and helping sort of in any way possible outside of their comfort zone to help deal with evolving challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it's also true that many of us have had to stop doing our typical research, either because we've had to leave campus or because being sort of experimental scientists were unable to access lab facilities and other required equipment. And so most research groups have transitioned to remote work, which really creates this difficulty and uncertainty for many people. And it means that a lot of work, like I said, really isn't possible anymore. And so added issues to that are kind of the challenges of working from home, which include, needing particular resources to even be able to have Zoom calls or continue working with your colleagues. And then added to that is sort of these issues of childcare, healthcare, family leave, and balancing a whole new type of workload along with the added stress of being at home and having these additional responsibilities. And so overall, people are worried about what this means for funding, whether that has a set expiration date, whether they'll be able to continue to be funded for sort of next year or the years after, for research progress and sort of what it means to put these projects on hold for months or years and how that affects graduation times and being able to have sort of stability in their PhD progression. And so really what this has highlighted is that across Harvard, there are actually no guarantees for another year of funding in most instances. And a lot of things are sort of being handled on a case-by-case basis, which means there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and planning for the next year and beyond is very difficult and stressful for some people. And so a union contract would really provide stability in this really uncertain time. And our union, we've been certified for 2 years, and we've sort of waited long enough, and now it's time for that.
Thank you, Maya. Up next, we have Nate.
Yeah, hi, my name is Nate Growl, and I'm a third-year PhD candidate here at Harvard in the history department, as well as being currently privileged to be the head teaching fellow for the course The War in Vietnam, which I recommend to everyone, just on the side note. But yes, as Maya was saying, there's a great deal of uncertainty and instability, and that's certainly been the case with the social scientists and humanities scholars that I speak with on a semi-regular basis here. So I want to start off with a message to the administration as a personal note, a Nate Growl message, so to speak, to the administration of GSAS or the Faculty of Arts and Science, should anyone be watching, which is, I understand that you have a bottom line and that the university is in deeply uncertain financial times. But this pandemic has fundamentally disrupted the professional trajectories of graduate scholars in the social sciences and humanities. I will not be here speaking up today amid such widespread suffering if we didn't need help. We need bridge funding to produce scholarship that we as professionals and Harvard as an institution can be proud of. Next year would have been my archival research year. As a historian, that's one of the centerpieces of our discipline. But I've already received notice that my research funding has been delayed through 2020 and maybe canceled outright if pandemic conditions persist. Even if it isn't totally canceled, the archive, the interlocutors, the interviewees that are crucial to my project are closed or unavailable, which makes any document requests or preparations completely impossible. These widespread closures mean that during research funding time that is funded by universities or external foundations, it'll just be spent getting the preliminaries taken care of. And really, there's not enough material that's going to be generated to really write a dissertation that is worthy kind of the time that we're being allocated. So the Harvard administration has created an artificial cutoff for our funding at 5 years. And after that point, many of us no longer can find work and see significant pay cuts, even if we are able to secure work. In the midst of a pandemic, it guarantees that entire cohorts will be delayed at least a year. That means we'll be forced to live on less, with less security, while doing the same work as everyone else. We're asking for Harvard to provide the same protections that other workforces have, which is provide stability in an uncertain time. Unfortunately, in recent communications from the administration, they've indicated they have no intention of guaranteeing pay for everyone next year. That is unacceptable. What we need is a year of bridge funding to guarantee that all students can complete research without having to scramble to make ends meet. Yale has come out, guaranteeing support for its graduate students. We know that Harvard can too. And on a final note, I just want to reiterate everything that my colleagues have brilliantly stated, which is that we need a contract. Now, Harvard has to step up and bargain in good faith with us. We wouldn't be facing this massive uncertainty if we had a contract that guaranteed our ability to conduct our research, to just do our jobs without fear for financial instability. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. And up next we have Shireen.
Hi everyone, my name is Shireen Hamza and I'm a 5th year in the History of Science department at Harvard. I've been a research assistant and a teaching fellow. And as more advanced PhD students who are approaching the end of our programs, many of us are no longer guaranteed teaching positions to support ourselves. So in addition, we have to also pay thousands of dollars in healthcare and facilities fees after the 5th year of our doctoral programs. And this means that delays in our research are really costly. Harvard has not yet provided any financial support for us to address this kind of contingency in our funding in general or in response to COVID-19. Additionally, many of us need to travel for our research, and like Nate, I would be traveling for archival research, and speaking with scholars in India, the region that I study. I'm facing major research delays and can no longer access a Fulbright grant, which would have provided a stipend for me to live on at this time, but is contingent on my being in India. Again, Harvard has done nothing concrete to address students in my situation who had found external funding, but which is no longer accessible. COVID-19, I think everyone here can sense this, it doesn't impact everyone equally. And the students who are already the most vulnerable, who may not have had safety nets or family to rely on, who may have dependents, these are the folks who are hardest hit right now. The administration has framed the GSAS emergency fund in a way as to imply that it's exceptional to be experiencing hardship and need help right now. And this is a fundamentally different kind of framework than a contract would provide. Likewise, over the past 2 years, I've been reading updates from our bargaining committee members telling us that Harvard has consistently refused to include civil rights protections in our contract, including the ability to file a grievance for harassment and discrimination. This adds another layer of vulnerability to the insult of dismissing our advocacy to address our financial concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen. Thank you to all of the students and student workers who have shared their experiences. We also have some recorded testimonials and some anonymous statements from other student workers that we will share if there's time today, and otherwise we'll make available to members of the press afterwards. Now I want to turn it over to Cambridge City Councilor Quentin Zondervan, who has been very active and vocal on COVID issues in the city, and particularly on ensuring that universities step up and do their part in this time. So, Councilor.
Thank you so much. I want to start by expressing my complete solidarity with the students, and I was with them during the strike last year as well. As you've heard, the teaching and research assistants at Harvard have contributed to the COVID-19 response in many ways, and as policymakers, we depend on their work in order to do our job. Research assistants have worked on sequencing, identifying information about the virus, testing protocols, researching treatments and vaccines, modeling the course of the disease to better understand how to implement effective policy. And again, we can't do our work without that scientific foundation. So at the same time, teaching assistants have been integral in shifting to virtual classwork. And my spouse is a faculty member at Harvard, and so I've seen the many challenges that come with that shift and the reliance on teaching assistants to assist with that, so that Harvard can complete its mission during this pandemic. And many of the researchers at Harvard and elsewhere are helping to educate the public, including myself, on some key principles of biology and chemistry and public health and public policy, again, so that we can do our jobs. So it's really critical that Harvard show its commitment to the student workforce. They deserve stability in pay and benefits, and an effective process to address discrimination and harassment in the workplace that they can trust. Obviously, this COVID-19 pandemic has created unprecedented chaos and unpredictability for everyone, including Harvard. But with chaos comes opportunity, and this is a great opportunity to get this contract in place and establish stability for the student workforce, avoid labor disruption, which becomes increasingly more likely without an agreement in place. So Harvard needs to commit to a schedule for bargaining to get to a settlement, so that everybody can enjoy peace in their labor and focus on dealing with their educational mission of Harvard and with the crisis at hand, because again, as a society and as a policymaker, we depend on that support. It's been over 2 years, and that's long enough. As the moderator mentioned, I've been collecting signatures on a petition to ask Harvard and MIT to step up their game and to do more in supporting us as a community in this crisis. And again, we depend on the student researchers and teaching assistants as part of that effort for Harvard to complete its mission. So I hope that Harvard will come to the table sincerely and put in place a contract very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Counselor. So that is our panel for today, and I want to open it up to questions. Once again, if you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature in the participants tab or submit it through the chat. And so while folks are doing that, I just want to start with one question that was submitted online in advance, which is, does HGSU-UAW have a response to Harvard's recent announcement that it will hold classes in the fall, whether in person or online? What are you most concerned about with regards to how continued online instruction will impact grad workers? And I'll turn that over to Justin in 1 second to talk about the union side, but I want to see if any of the other student workers on the panel want to answer specifically how continued online instruction affects their role as workers, as teaching assistants at the university.
Yes, I think the greatest concern is that if workload is too excessive. I mean, it has depended on the class. The class I've been teaching for, we've transitioned fairly smoothly to online learning. But clearly the university is, this semester was a transition period. Recent communication also articulated wanting to, I think, to do it well and to do it and to plan so that it can be done sort of, if it has to be online for the entire semester, it can be done continuously. The thing that the university needs to do is sign a contract so we have a workload provision, because the biggest concern, I think, would be that the workload expectations could be excessive in sort of a period where there isn't precedent about what workload should be.
Great, thank you. And I see we have a question from Michael Glenn. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Actually, I'm coming up under my husband's Zoom account. So my name is Susan Sherrod, not Michael Glenn. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I totally support the union. I'm an alum and who helped organize the Teaching Fellows Union in 1966 through 68. We had one then, we negotiated a contract, not nearly as complete as yours. But I'm also a member of the group of 69 strikers around the Vietnam War who are also strong supporters of you. So I just wanted to say that I guess my question that I had, you really already answered, but it was really about the fact of online teaching requiring more work. I have a son who is a professor now teaching online at USC. I have a friend who's a professor at Berkeley School of Music now teaching online, and they both say that online teaching is actually more time consuming to do it well, to actually translate. And so, you know, I guess that was really my question, is this adding to your workload to be doing the online teaching?
Yeah, thank you for that. Do any of the panelists want to talk a little more about their experience with online teaching so far?
May I briefly? So I just want to say that, you know, I think it's really important that we provide continuity for the students and that we give them, you know, a comprehensive or like an effective educational experience. But the training that we received for teaching, you know, when we first entered Harvard and when we first became teaching fellows for the first time was, I think, very specific and tailored to the classroom. And so there has been a retraining aspect of this internally that I think everyone has had to go through, right? But in order to provide the sorts of superior quality experience that our deans and our key administrators are indicating will need to happen in the fall, I think that there should be an institutional effort to try to, retrain faculty members and teaching fellows, because as much as, and I respect the professor under whom I work immensely, right? But technologically speaking, a lot of professors don't quite have the digital literacy that the younger generations who are typically fill out the ranks of TS do. And what that means is a lot of coordination and a lot of just basic technical questions either fall on our shoulders or the administrators who work at, for example, the Bach Center, who are involved in teaching, pedagogy, scholarship, and I think that to make it more equitable, a much more comprehensive institutional effort needs to take place. And I think a contract provides really the perfect framework for that, for regulating what is what person's responsibility. Otherwise, a lot of that work just slides downhill.
I want to add one more thing. So I think something many people have seen probably online from stories or talking to many of their friends or family, it is very hard to teach when you have kids. And so some sort of accommodation for parents who's just simply unfeasible to teach at home. When you have a partner and kids, apartments in Cambridge are small. It can often be very challenging. So making sure there's accommodation there is essential.
Absolutely, thank you. And I want to go to another question that came in online. Could you talk a little bit about the protections that are being offered if they are at peer institutions? And I know Nate mentioned Yale's response in his remarks, and I'm curious from some of the other panelists what they've heard of other peer institutions.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to jump in and say that UChicago has also stepped up really well for their students and has really gone above and beyond what was expected. So all of their students are funded, that's what I mean.
Great, and my understanding from Yale is that they have offered basically the option to extend guaranteed funding years for PhD students by 1 year, and that is administered through the department level, but the funding is provided by the university as a whole. And so to avoid issues where it's kind of in the department's interest to deny someone funding because it would take away from other department funds. And I think from the bargaining committee side, we've often seen the administration here talk about each department or each school acting independently, and there not being an effective way to coordinate among different schools and different programs. But I think some of the peer institutions have shown that that's really not the case. And if the university is willing to step up and provide the funding that's necessary to support students and student workers, then those issues go away and each department can administer programs in the way that makes sense for them. But if you're not relying on the departments to provide that funding in these times when their budgets are stretched thin, but rather supporting it through the endowment and the central university, that really can open up things and provide a lot more support for students and student workers. We have a comment from Carly online who on the previous point that Justin was making, adding that daycares are closed in Massachusetts until June 29th. And so, yeah, certainly for this semester, it's been tricky to navigate on the fly if you're writing or teaching without childcare. And that those family issues have come up again and again in contract negotiations, and we've seen an unwillingness from the administration to really support student workers with families. So we have a question from Sam. Can the panelists say more about how the Harvard administration is collaborating with the Trump administration to hamper not only their own workers' rights, but all workers' rights more broadly?
There we go. So the announcement about the NLRB ruling, and so what it would be is that private student workers at private universities would no longer be sort of protected under the National Labor Relations Act. Came out in June. I'm sorry, maybe July of last year. So it appears, looking back, that is when the pace of bargaining from the university side has really slowed down, and it does seem to be more than just Harvard. It sounds like other universities like Columbia have changed their bargaining positions since that ruling was announced. So it's not so much that Harvard is single-handedly undermining the ability of student workers to organize, but that many private universities are also seeking to do so. And the primary way Harvard is doing it is by not agreeing to a contract. They agreed in certification 2 years ago to bargain in good faith. And based on their slow walking tactics, they just haven't lived up to that.
Thank you. We have a question from Doris Landaverde, who is asking why Harvard is not willing to give a sexual harassment and discrimination protection in the contract. And Shireen mentioned this a little earlier. So Shireen, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that issue and if you have any thoughts on Harvard's response to it.
Thank you. I would like to ask someone who's on the bargaining committee to also respond, but as far as I know, this has really been a part of HGSU-UAW's campaign from the beginning, and there's also a wing that's specifically about civil rights issues. So I don't know why it's such an issue, but I know that it's one of the issues where the university hasn't budged since the beginning.
So I think it's fairly straightforward when you have arbitration for non-discrimination cases, you have an outsider with an authority. And I think the administration does not want to have their decisions questioned. But maybe they're willing to do so for less sensitive topics like a workload complaint. But when it comes to discrimination, they want to be able to make decisions themselves. The problem is that workload complaints, other sort of regular workload issues are often bound up with discrimination as well. And so you cannot just simply separate these issues. But it's really about having control. And student workers deserve to have someone who can actually observe a situation sort of independently, neutrally, that's not funded by solely by the university or employed at the university to make a judgment about whether discrimination did occur and what should be done about it.
Yeah, and we have a related point from Carly about wondering about how this situation is exacerbating existing disparities in academia. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, there are a lot of factors that cause these disparities in terms of gender and sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as racial disparities, disparities on economic background in academia, and all of them are being exacerbated by this crisis. And you can see in the chat, Carly posted a link to an article specifically about research productivity among women scientists during this crisis. And I think that is something that really needs to be looked at, and especially if it's because of issues around childcare, that's certainly something that needs to be addressed in a holistic manner by the university and needs to be addressed all the time, not just in a pandemic, as Justin had mentioned. And the same thing with harassment and discrimination. These issues become heightened during a pandemic. We're already seeing harassment based on race because of this pandemic in a lot of realms of the world. And so it's even more important than ever to have protections against harassment and discrimination that really have some weight behind them.
May I add to that just briefly?
Please.
I think also on a more, just at the most pragmatic, practical level, I've heard from my colleagues who are teaching where before they had a single or two sections, multiple sections to accommodate for different time zones, who are reaching out and finding exceptional measures for reaching out to students who either have limited internet access or have no internet access, right? And this idea that we can continue to the semester as if everything is okay and that everything is returning to normal, when there are still students of ours or grad student workers who have precarious access or no access to the internet, I think again will exacerbate socioeconomic and also generally these map onto racial or gender lines as well. And so, you know, this idea that we can revert back in a situation of exception like we have here in the pandemic, I think it speaks to the general lack of understanding of the very precarious situations that a lot of our students and a lot of grad student workers themselves are in.
Thank you. Yeah. So we have a question from Brian Buckley about the student health insurance plan, noting that it is a self-insured account. And so wondering if we can provide insight on how to structure a student health plan in a way that does not put more cost on all students. I can speak to this a little from my perspective at the public health school. This is a really interesting question, and this issue of self-insured plans and different requirements they have under the law, different obligations to their members, is one that's come up a lot in bargaining sessions. I think, first of all, I'll note that a lot of other universities do have student health plans that are much more comprehensive, that don't have things like a cap on the number of specialist visits that a student can use, that don't have a cap on the number of mental health visits that are covered under the plan, that provide much more significant financial protection against those worst case scenarios. And that's true even in Boston. MIT grad workers, BU grad workers, I've looked at their plans, and they are much more robust to some of those issues and do not cost student workers anymore. Many schools also have much cheaper offerings for dependent insurance, and that's a particularly big issue, again, highlighting disparities and issues that student workers with families face. So there, in the sense of the university and the cost of the plan, waiving those limits on the most high need cases actually doesn't cost the university all that much because it's not used by that many students, but it provides an enormous amount of financial protection to those people who need it. And so it's a question of who can really bear this risk. And I think it's clear that the university with tens of billions of dollars in their endowment can bear the risk a lot more easily than an individual student worker and their family. And then there are some more complex insurance options, reinsurance and things like that, that I don't want to spend too long on this, but there are ways for the university to put more money into the plan so that they do not have to raise premiums on students across the board. They can choose essentially how much money to pay into the plan to support student workers. And if this is, if they really believe that health is a human right, as it says on posters all throughout the School of Public Health, then this is a very simple thing that the university can do to actually live up to that promise. We have a question from Chance. Can you speak more to Harvard's response regarding the hardships that international grad workers face, such as the lack of ability to work beyond Harvard itself, limited access to grants, visa restrictions, no access to stimulus checks or related safety nets? So do we have someone on the panel who would like to address international student workers?
So the university did send out guidance that international student workers' visa status would not be in question through this, which is positive. But someone informed me that restrictions on finding outside work have been lifted, though I do not know details about that. Perhaps someone who is an international student present here maybe can speak to that as well. But it is also not exactly an easy time to find work. So it's many international students also tend to be families, and sort of, believe it or not, are often socioeconomically less able to have support externally from family. So it certainly is even more challenging for people who don't have that external support.
Thank you. And I know we have some international student workers on the call who are not on the panel, but I want to invite if any of them want to unmute and talk about how these issues specifically affect international students. That would be great. Okay, then I want to move on to another question we got online. What can be done about empty semesters caused by COVID mandated project delays? And I think all of our student workers on the panel mentioned some delays in their own projects. I want to see if give any of you a chance to talk a little bit more about those delays and how you think the university can best address those.
I'd be happy to add something just briefly here in relation. So as I expressed earlier in the sort of like official statement, the Fulbright grant that I got, has been delayed at least through January, if not being canceled in its entirety. We have only 4 semesters of guaranteed teaching provided, or guaranteed rather, by Harvard. And to burn through one of these semesters of guaranteed teaching with basically no material with which I can write my dissertation would really severely impact my ability to write a good dissertation down the line, because after the 4 semesters are up, you're looking at significant pay cuts, taking on more teaching responsibilities in order to make up for that gap. And writing a dissertation under those conditions is, I think a lot of the more senior grad students know, pretty difficult. So something that I can see just immediately, at the very least, is an extension of the time we have in terms of guaranteed teaching, because through no fault of our own, we're going to be stuck here in Cambridge without research funding, and we just need to sort of make ends meet, ride out this crisis together as a community, and then move on to produce the kind of scholarship that we came here to produce. That's my take.
If I can add something else. So I guess from the perspective of an experimental scientist, there is some stuff that we can do now, having transitioned into remote work. But I think for a lot of people that I've talked to, and sort of for my own research, there's a huge amount of my dissertation that's just not possible to do remotely. And it means that, you know, this is not a delay that means, oh, like maybe one chapter of my dissertation will look different. It just means however long we're stuck not being able to go into lab, that adds on, you know, double that time to actually being able to finish the dissertation. And so I think for a lot of students, especially if you are in an experimental lab, the guidance that we've sort of been hearing is that, like, you know, your advisor will provide for your funding, and then we'll consider that on a case-by-case basis. But I think what's not really accounted for in that fact is that the way that you get grants is based on your experimental sort of findings and being able to show something. And so this chunk of not being able to do work because we're not able to access the labs will affect the ability of the grants, or affect our ability to be able to get grants and fellowships in the future. And so I think one of the things that the university really should be doing for us is looking into this year of bridge funding and really guaranteeing the fact that, look, because of this delay, it means that it's not just 2 months or 3 months of your research that's really being affected. It's this entire sort of year trajectory of stuff. And so I think really putting in place this year of bridge funding is something that we really need in this situation.
Thank you. And so we have just a couple minutes left. I want to get to one more question that we had submitted online, which was, given the university deficit, how does that impact the union's strategy? And I think this is talking about the university has announced an operating deficit for this academic year. And so I want to turn that to Justin to answer how that changes the union's strategy.
Sure. So we recognize that we are in a different world economically than even a few months ago. But that doesn't change many of the things that we're negotiating over. The university can still provide some financial security and the stability. And it also doesn't change anything non-financial. So protections against discrimination, from harassment, from retaliation, are all still on the table, and the university should be able to address them.
Great, thank you. And I'll just note, kind of tying this to a question that Max raised in the chat, that certainly includes the tentative agreement we've already signed with the administration about non-discrimination against international students. And on the bargaining committee, we think we've had some success on some very important tentative agreements. And one of the big ones there is about international student workers. And it's very unfortunate how the university's kind of slow rolling the negotiations on all of these other also important issues has delayed the implementation of those important protections. And so we really see the importance of getting this contract done so that we can start implementing those protections and working to improve the working and learning lives of student workers here at the university as soon as possible. So we are at our time here at 1 o'clock. I want to thank all of the panelists again for joining us and for sharing their stories, and thank everyone else who joined the call for spending this time with us and hearing about these really important issues. We will be sharing a video soon with some testimonials from additional student workers, as well as some anonymous testimonials we've gotten. And if you have any other questions or we weren't able to get to your question today, you can email the union at, it is hgsu.general@gmail.com. And you can also find that contact information as well as our demands of the administration and resources for student workers on our website, which is harvardgradunion.org. So thank you again for joining us. Stay safe, and we will see you all again soon.